the best drift cars in GTA Online. Now there are tons of cars you can drift with in this game, but if you truly want to master GTA drifting, you're going to need one of these cars right here. So today, I'm going to go ahead and give you my picks for the top 10 best drift cars in GTA Online. Now you guys knocked it out of the park in terms of support for the last video, but ever since I made that, there have been a ton of changes and updates regarding drifting in the game, especially regarding the Tuners DLC cars. So some of the cars in that video don't really cut it in terms of drifting anymore, so I figured an updated guide was in order. Now if you guys do enjoy the video, you do find it helpful, please do leave a like and subscribe down below. Any support would be greatly appreciated as these videos take ages to make. Every car on this ranking today is going to be justified in fact with reasoning why it deserves that spot, but all of the cars on this list are brilliant picks for anybody who really wants to go ahead and start drifting at really a whole variety of skill levels and drifting styles. So there's something for everyone here. But with all that being said, let's jump straight in with our pick at number 10. At the number 10 spot, we have the Comet Futo. Now this has been a super popular choice for beginner drifters for a really long time, and it's super easy to see why. Now this car, first up, is incredibly cheap. At only $9,000, you can go ahead and buy one right now off of Southern San Andreas or steal one off the street. It is literally an absolute steal. Next up, it's also a very controllable and super easy to learn drift car. This thing is incredibly easy. The difficulty level is non-existent with this thing. If you are completely new to drifting, will learn how to drift this thing in about 10 minutes. This thing is super easy to get the hang of, and alongside that, it is really controllable. This thing you can hold a super nice smooth line with for really not all that much effort. It is a great choice for beginners, but alongside that, higher skill drifters can also have a ton of fun with it, as you can use all sorts of different drifting methods with it. You can use stuff like the Scandinavian flick, single gear drifting, or if you need a bit more kick, use the mid-drive speed boost to really get the thing sliding. The car is best suited for smaller tracks around kind of inner city areas or tight courses, but with all that being said, it's a brilliant choice for beginners and always a fun car to throw about. Next up on the list, we have the Woolyard Faction. You can go ahead and buy this car for $36K off of the Benny's website, and the way I describe this car is a sluggish but very forgiving drift car. The lines that you can pull off with this car are always going to be super smooth. The car, it does stagnate a bit in the handling, but at the same time it just glides through the corners. It does handle a bit like a boat, but that works in your favor when you're drifting. This isn't a high speed kind of car for sure, but that weight that it has to it makes it a little bit easier to transition with, and it's super easy to get sliding. Now at those very high speeds, it is a little bit more difficult because of that weight, but for those lower to medium speeds, this thing absolutely glides through the corners and it is a dream to drift. This thing is super easy to get the hang of. The only real negative I have for this car is because of the suspension. Sometimes if you hit curbs or you hit a little kind of bump in the road or something, the car will just go flying. I don't know why that is. I think it's just when it stands, it just bugs out. But other than that, super good drift car. Absolutely must pick again for most people. Pretty much all skill levels can really get this going. If you're a beginner, you can give this a shot. If you want to go ahead and start transitioning to those higher speed cars, this might be a good place to start. So for some of you, this might be an unexpected entry, but we have the Classy Vamos. Now this is definitely a niche drift car. You don't see too many people sliding this thing about at all, but for just shy of 600,000, you could have some old school American muscle to go ahead and glide through the corners. This thing can be super smooth with a really nice line through the corners and can be really fluid with that movement. And it's a pretty good drift car, don't get me wrong. The only thing about it is that it is challenging. Doesn't make it a bad drift car by any means, but you will need a decently high skill level to be able to master this thing. Absolutely, the oversteer on this car is crazy. If you put just a little bit too much throttle on it, it will spin out. It will absolutely fly out from under you and you will not be able to control it. So this is definitely for those higher skill drifters. I'd say the easiest way to describe it is almost like a faster Faction with a bit more oversteer. So it's as if the Faction just had a bit more power. It still glides pretty similarly to that. It has got a decent bit of weight to it, but at the same time, you have to be very careful with your throttle and your steering input to make sure that you don't spin out. If you manage to get those skills down, I think you'll have an absolute blast throwing this car about. And honestly, it's a ton of fun. I'm surprised I didn't find this thing earlier. Another good pick, but let's move on to the next one. Next up, we have the Pfister Fusillade. Now this thing has been overlooked and overshadowed for such a long time, and I don't really see why. I feel it's undeserved, as this is one of the most capable drift cars in the game. This car is an absolute steal as well. For only 36k, you can buy yourself a very capable top-end drift car. But alongside that, there should be a little aside. This is a very difficult car to drift, more so than most of the other cars on this list. It is incredibly high in power. It's got a very strong kick to it with that mid-drive speed boost or double clutch, but at the same time, the car's shorter wheelbase paired up with that makes it quite twitchy when drifting at those higher speeds. So trying to link up your corners together and everything at those higher end speeds, those longer drifts, is going to be a lot more challenging and will require a lot more skill. By no means is it impossible, and it can certainly be done. It just will take a lot of time to master, but it is still a wonderful drift car, and for anyone who wants to go ahead and mix up their drifting garage, I strongly recommend you give it a go. Now you're probably getting sick and tired of seeing American muscle cars on this list, but time and time again they prove us that they are oh so good at drifting in this game, as is the Gauntlet Hellfire. You can go ahead and pick one of these up for 745k on, I believe it's San Andreas, and this car is super fluid with its movement. You can drift this at pretty much all speeds, and it will just glide through those corners with pretty much little to no finesse needed. Now it is a bit more on the higher side of power, which means that the mid-drive speed boost is pretty strong, so it can get you out of a pinch if you lose a bit of speed, you take the corner a bit wrong. It is a little bit more on that forgiving side, but it is still going to be a little bit more challenging for those who are a bit more inexperienced. But absolutely would recommend you go ahead and give it a go. I only tried this thing a couple weeks back and fell in love with it really quickly. This thing is awesome. Super good all-rounder in terms of driftability, all of that. Very versatile. You can use it all kinds of different situations. But the only thing about it I think you'd have to keep in mind is that you cannot stance it. It doesn't really hinder the car too much. The only thing is most drift cars, you slam it down twice using the stance glitch, and then it just makes the car drift better. This is part of only a few cars in the game that cannot be stanced, just something to keep in mind. But besides that, still a very capable drift car, and I would highly recommend it. Now we have the Comet Retro Custom. Now this car is not cheap. It will set you back a solid 745k just for the car alone. 100 from the base Comet, which you can buy on the Legendary Motorsport or Benny's website, and then another 645k upgrading it at the Benny's workshop. So it's not cheap. You're already about 800k all in, but I'd say that price is definitely worth it. This is again one of the absolute top drift cars in this game. Super well suited, well rounded for a lot of different drifting situations, and with that high power comes a very good mid-drive speed boost to really carry you through those longer stretches of corners to get all sorts of transitions and entry types in there. Very good high level drift car that I'd highly recommend. It is going to be a little bit more on the challenging side than some of the other drift cars on this list, maybe not to the extent of something like the Fusillade, but it can be a bit twitchy at that high end of speed as well, primarily because of that high power and it being rear wheel drive. The back end, it is an old school Porsche. It really does want to kick out, so you will need to just be careful with your steering input and your throttle input to make sure you don't go overboard. But by no means is it a bad drift car. This is an absolutely solid option for people who are wanting to get into drifting and people at that higher skill level who want to try new stuff out. This is another great pick that I could highly recommend all day every day. But let's move on to our next pick. Now this is a bit of a different one. We've got the Redwood Gauntlet here. Now this is a very capable drift car that people have been banging on about for years, but I never really tried it until recently, and now I see why people are making such a fuss. This car is a super good all-rounder in terms of drifting potential, very capable, and it is definitely aimed towards those who are a bit more experienced with drifting. It is a pretty difficult car to get the hang of, but it's a great all-rounder for drifting. Has a really strong mid-drive speed boost, so you can go ahead and link this up together with drift super nicely at those higher speeds, and it's pretty agile as well. At those higher speeds, it is going to be a little bit more grippy, and it will be harder to get the back end to kick out unless you're really spamming the mid-drive speed boost, but most experienced drifters do that anyway. So if you've got decent experience with some of the other higher powered cars, you should find this just fine. And the beauty about this car as well is that it costs nothing. This car is free, because this car is only meant to be free for those who are returning players, but ever since Rockstar mucked something up like a year or so back, all of the returning player vehicles and rewards were awarded to everybody, meaning that you can buy one of these for the lovely low price of $0. There is no reason you should now not pick one up. It is free. Go ahead and get yourself one. Do yourself a favor, try it, because most of you probably haven't given this a shot. And if you have, let me know what you think of it down below. But let's move on to the next one. Next up, we have the Benefactor Schwartzer. Now this fine piece of German engineering sounds mean and is also clean through those corners. This is one of the smoothest cars in terms of holding a line in all of GTA drifting. Absolutely must pick, I'm just gonna say right off the bat, and it is not even that difficult to drift in the first place. This is pretty simple and pretty easy to get the hang of compared to some of the other cars on this list. This thing you can hold crazy lines for, super smooth, and it is pretty cheap too at only $80,000 on Southern San Andreas. Now this thing is really controllable for its power. It does have quite a bit of it, and you will need to use the mid-drive speed boost trick to utilize that. But you know, for people who are kind of getting towards that intermediate stage of drifting skill and above, this is an absolute must pick. This car is amazing to go ahead and slide through those corners, and you can go ahead and do some more kind of mad techniques with it and all of that as well. This thing has a ton of potential for that. It's a very versatile drift car and very capable for a lot of different kind of skills and tricks if you want to pull that sort of stuff off. This thing, not really anywhere I can really fault it. Absolutely love the car. One of my personal favorites for drifting, and I'd highly recommend you go ahead and pick one up as well. Now, at the number 2 spot, we have got one of the top dogs in the GTA drifting world, the Rapid GT. This, for $132,000, a drift car of this caliber is an absolute steal. This thing is super smooth with its line and is very fluid through those corners. You know, it doesn't require too much steering input or throttle control. Of course, it will need some, but this car is super forgiving and controllable, but also offers, you know, a ton of drifting ability combined with that. So that makes it drifting at those higher levels super easy compared to some of the other cars on this list, and is very well rounded for all kinds of drifting techniques. For those higher skill players who are looking to drift, you know, using all kinds of different entries or, you know, setups and tricks like, you know, maybe a jump drift, 360 entries, reverse entries, you know, people who are that kind of higher level of skill, you can pretty much achieve all of that with this car and our number 1 pick. But for those who are, you know, a little bit more inexperienced, who are just trying to get normal drifting and all of that down, this is not a bad pick also. This is super versatile drift car, not even too much of a step up in difficulty from the Schwartzer. I could not recommend it enough. It's a very, very well suited drift car for pretty much all skill levels, and it is just brilliant. I love this car. Absolutely has always been in my top 3 for drifting in this game, and you know what? I'd highly recommend you pick one up. Now, at the number 1 spot, we have the king of GTA drifting right here, the Banshee 900R. It was previously dethroned by some of the absolute bangers coming out of the Tuners DLC, such as the Futo GTX. However, since those cars were nerfed into oblivion, it has reclaimed its title, and this thing still holds up today. You know, it's a little bit on the older side, but that doesn't matter. For 105k of initial price, on top of another 565k on top of that, you know, you're nearly 700k all in on this car. But if you really want that highest level of drifting in this game, it's absolutely worth it. By far, probably the best, or you know, well, I'd say by far, except maybe the Rapid GT, best car in the game for drifting. You know, both of them are at that similar level, but this thing I'd say is just a bit more versatile in terms of, you know, what you can do with it in terms of drifting setups and all kinds of tricks and stuff. You know, like I said, 360 entries, jump drift, reverse entries. This is probably the best car in the game to do all of those with, and this thing can hold super smooth long lines with all day, absolutely glide through the corners so elegantly with it as well. Crazy power, crazy mid-drive speed boost. This thing will just fly and is an absolute blast for people of really higher skill levels, you know, to those really experienced drifters. But by no means does that mean people who are, you know, a bit newer shouldn't try it. I'd highly recommend you give this a shout. You know, it will take a good bit of practice to get used to, and it is a difficult learning process, don't get me wrong. It is very high powered, it's very likely to spin out, oversteer, all of that, but once you tame this beast, it is going to do you wonders for drifting. This is an absolute absolute blast all the time to absolutely just throw about, and it's probably my favorite car in GTA to drift. This is an awesome car, and I don't think I could recommend anything above this thing. Absolutely amazing. Have to just rate it all day every day, and I think most people who are experienced with drifting would agree. Now that is going to be it for tonight's lineup, so let me know down below what you thought of the list and if you think we missed anything out. Do make sure to stay tuned to our drifting playlist for all the new drifting content that's going to be coming to the channel soon, and don't forget to drop a like and a sub if you found the video helpful or informative. It would be greatly appreciated. But that's it. Thank you all very much for watching, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day.